prayer list. Well, last week, we stopped at verse 22, chapter 25, verse 22. And it was King Agrippa and Bernice, his sister, and his wife. They show up to welcome Festus. You got to realize Festus is the governor. Now, Agrippa may be the king of Judah, but it is the governor, it is Festus that's going to have all the power because he represents his Rome. So they come and they're there. Well, while they're there, Agrippa learns about Paul and he wants to know more about him. He says, hey, I'd like to meet this guy. And that's where we're going to pick up our story in verse 23. So after that, so he comes up the next day, Agrippa and Bernice, they go to the auditorium, they bring in all these, it says prominent men of the city. And Festus says, hey, go get that Paul guy and bring him here. The king wants to see him. And that's what they do. So they go get him. And Festus, when he comes in, Festus, well, there he is, Everyone had heard about Paul. They knew about the churches that he had started or had planted. They knew about his preaching. He had been doing this for some time. And he says, this is the man. This is the man that the Jews want me to kill back in Jerusalem. Well, from that, all the folks, the crowd, these prominent men, which are nothing more than a bunch of Sadducees, they're there, kill him. We want him dead. Do away with him. And begin to shout more and more and more. Well, verse 25, Festus goes on and says, hey, I didn't find anything he did wrong. I can't find any reason why I need to kill him. But he said, hey, I want to appeal to Nero, which is the Caesar, the emperor at the time. And so I'm going to send him there. But now I want you to get this. Festus is no dummy. He is fixing to put this on the king. He's going to put all this on all those people that are in this auditorium. I don't know how many there are. There could be hundreds. But he's going to put this on them because he said, I don't have anything to write the emperor about. I can't find nothing that he did, Agrippa. And after you do your investigation, maybe I got something to write about. Because it seems crazy to me, or ludicrous to me, that I should send a prisoner and not have anything to charge him against. So he's putting the blame where the blame should go really back on the Jews. So Festus is going to kind of save his neck. Well, that's how chapter 25 ends. But in chapter 25, we continue our story with Paul. They're going to bring him there. Paul's standing there. He's hearing all this takes place. And then, in verse 26, Paul's standing there and he said, now, Agrippa, he's looking at Agrippa, and Agrippa says, hey, man, you can speak. You're permitted to say whatever you want to. And Paul extends his hand as if he's going to, I don't know if the King James Bible says as he gives his witness or if he gives his testimony. I can't remember which is which. But anyway, he's going to stand there. He said, hey, Agrippa. And Paul ain't no dumb either. He's fixing to butter Agrippa up. He said, Agrippa, I consider myself fortunate to make my defense before you. Hey, you are an expert in all customs among the Jews. I beg you to listen to me patiently. Now, this, you know all customs doesn't mean just with the Jews, because the Herod family, Caesar Augustus had appointed Herod the Great as king of Judah. Now then, Herod and Augusta were big friends. They were big buddies. So the Herod family not only knew of Jewish customs because they were Jew, but because of Herod, their name, they know Roman customs. So Paul has buttered him up. Hey, you know all these things. And he says, he goes on, verse 4, he says, all these Jews, they've known me since my youth. Now remember, we said that Paul and his family moved from Tarsus to Jerusalem when he was about 12 years old. He was educated within the synagogue. He was educated by one of the most prominent Pharisees of the time, Gallio, and he knew everything. He knew everything that the prophet said, and he knew the law of Moses. So he goes on and he says, hey, they've known me. They trained me. He said, it says, if they're willing to testify, I'll let them testify. I live the Pharisee according to the strictest sect of our religion. Now then, you got the Pharisees, the Sadducees, but one group we don't ever mention because they're not really in the political mix, and that's going to be the Nazarites or the Nazarenes. So that is going to play a prominent figure right here as Paul continues to tell his story. He says, now I'm standing trial for the hope of the promise that God made to our fathers, which our 12 tribes hope to obtain. Now this hope, King, is considered incredible among the people if God raises the dead. Now that hit a nerve with Agrippa, because Agrippa knows the prophets. He knows everything that has been prophesied about this Messiah, and he knows about this Jesus that had been crucified. So he knows about Paul. So that's where we're at. Paul goes on and he says, I thought that I had to act in opposition to the name of Jesus, the Nazarene. He was from Nazareth, and they're calling him a Nazarene, which he was not a Nazarene. Okay, so that is so that the Sadducees can connect Jesus with this kind of an awful wall group of people. So anything, he goes on and says, hey, what I did, I locked them up. I put them in prison. Hey, I even voted to have them killed. That's what I did. And then he goes on, he says, I went to the synagogues, I forced them to blaspheme, I was enraged, I hated them. Just like they do, I hated them. I pursued them to the foreign cities. Now then, this is where it gets really good. Paul then in verses 12 through 18, and you're going to have to use your Bibles there because I didn't put the scripture on the board, but I'm going to tell you of what happened. So Paul's standing there. The first thing he says, I was commissioned by the chief priest. Now then, this ain't them, but it was these two dudes portrayed them in the movie, and I kind of took my picture from there. So you got Ananias, who was appointed high priest by Governor Cyrenius in 6 AD. So he is the high priest. He is the leader of the Sanhedrin. Then I don't know what happens. I couldn't find it well, maybe I didn't dig deep enough. But at any rate, he kind of steps down and pushes his son-in-law, Caiaphas, into the position of high priest. Now it's going to be Caiaphas that is going to be the one who is in charge when Christ is crucified. But when they take Jesus that night in Gethsemane, they don't take him to Caiaphas first. They take him to Ananias, who is the former high priest. This guy still has a lot of leverage among the governors. So, he's got his son-in-law appointed. He has his trial. He sends him to Caiaphas. There he has his trial. He sends him to Pilate. This is just a big mess. These two dudes, they're not good people. They're ruthless. They're cruel. They, as Sadducees, they don't believe in the spirits. They don't believe in resurrection. They don't believe in angels. They don't even believe in heaven. That's who these guys are. And they are the leaders of the church at the time. Kind of sounds weird, doesn't it? Well, that's who these folks are. Now remember, Cyrenius is the governor at that time. Well, he picks up his story. He says, well, you know, I was on my way to Damascus and I had a letter from the high priest. Do you remember a couple of weeks ago when Paul comes back in and Ananias is the high priest? Paul didn't know it. At some time while Paul was gone away, Caiaphas had stepped down for whatever reason, and Ananias is now the high priest again. So Paul's standing there. He said, hey, look, I had a letter from the high priest to go and bring in people, to go and bring those people in. On the way, I was struck down by this bright light. Not only did I see it, but all them guys that was with me, they saw it, and then they heard the voice from God, from Jesus Christ. And he spoke to me in Hebrew. Now that's important. The Old Testament is written in that old Semitic language, which is Hebrew, but there are portions of the Old Testament that is written in Aramaic. The reason it's in Aramaic is because those prophets, at the time they were taken to Babylon into captivity, that is the language that they spoke. So when they come back, it was only natural for them to have been assimilated into that language. But the Greeks are coming. Hang on. Anyway, he said, I had these letters. They're sending me away. I'm struck down to this light. He speaks to me in Hebrew. It was Jesus. He says, hey, why are you kicking against the pricks, man? Why are you going against everything that I'm teaching or everything that I was about? Well, then in verse, verse 18, Jesus says, you are going to open the eyes so that they may see. You're going to speak to the Gentiles and open their eyes so that they may see in darkness. Hey, they're no longer going to be in darkness. They're going to be in light. And he goes on, and then in verse 19, he says, for that reason, Agrippa, I was not disobedient to that vision. I was not disobedient to what Jesus told me, but I proclaimed in Damascus. Then I went to Jerusalem, and I said the same thing. I went out through all Judea, proclaiming the saving grace of Jesus Christ. I even went to the Gentiles, and that's what he did. Now, for this reason, they seized me in the temple and tried to murder me. Remember, when Paul came back, he and others came with gifts, came with money to give to the temple or to give to the Jews. These leaders said, man, you got to go purify yourself. You're unclean. Well, to keep from stirring up a ruckus, Paul goes. He is going to take the vow or the cleansing with the Nazarites. And that's why they're calling him a Nazarene. But it is while he is gone that they send the temple guard. They're going to arrest Paul and they're going to kill him. Look at what Paul has to say then. By the grace of God, I attained help. God intervened. I stand this day testifying both to small and great, stating that of what the prophets and Moses had to say has taken place. The resurrection of the dead, he said, I would proclaim that before great and small, even kings. Now then, when we begin to look at this, hear what he's saying in verse 23 or 24. Festus is going to say, shut up, stop, I've heard enough. Now then, look at what old Festus says. In a loud voice, he said, Paul, you crazy. You're out of your mind testifying about somebody coming back from the dead. That can't happen. Your great learning has driven you insane. Remember, he knows the prophets. The prophets said it was going to happen, and Paul is standing before the king of Judah. He's standing before the next man, the man who would speak to Caesar himself, and he's testifying to those folks. Now then, as we look at what he saw. He says, Paul, you out of your mind. Great learning driving you crazy. You're insane. Paul said, I ain't crazy. I'm telling you the truth. I'm speaking rational. That is why Paul loved going to Greece. That's why he loved Athens. That's why he loved Ephesus. Because these people didn't just, I hate you, we're going to kill you. They actually sat down and they would reason. They could talk back and forth. The Jews here, they have completely rejected salvation. They don't have anything to do with this Jesus Christ. They don't want to hear anything about Jesus. That's what they've done. Well, he goes on and he says, look, King, you know all this. Because he knows the Scriptures. He said, none of things are going to escape you. You know all about it. None of these things that have been said has been said in secret. They're all out in the open. Now then, King Agrippa. He says, King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? Folks, that is an important statement. That is like me and you asking a sinner that's heard the Savior, heard the message, do you believe in Jesus Christ? That's what's happened here, kind of, sort of. He says, I know you believe. And look at what Agrippa says now. You got to get this out of the King James. I love it. Agrippa looks at him, and in my mind's eye I can see him. Paul, almost you persuade me to become a Christian. Now then, I also like what it says here in the American Standard. Look at what he says to Paul. In a short time, you're going to persuade me to make a Christian of myself. Folks, let me tell you, there ain't nobody on the face of the earth can make you a Christian or make you a believer than you. Only you can believe in the saving grace of Jesus Christ. Only you can believe that story. And that is what Paul, and when you look it down in the actual Greek words that are spoken here, these two verses in the King James and the way it is said in the American Standard, they blend and they complement one another. Only I can make myself a Christian by believing in Jesus Christ, doing what he did. Well, that said, old Paul looked at Agrippa and he said, hey, I would wish to God that in a short time or in a long time that everyone would believe and come like me. And that's where it's left. almost he persuaded me to become a Christian. Well, in verses 26, in chapter 26, verses 30 and 32, look at what happens. Now then, it says, they stood up, the king, Bernice, and Agrippa, they stood up and they're leaving. They're going out the door and they're talking among themselves. And Festus says, this man has not done anything to be killed for. And then Agrippa says, this man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar, to Nero. That's who is the emperor now. Now think about that. Agrippa knew it. Do you realize that Agrippa had the power to set him free? Festus had the power to set him free. The only one that is sending him to see Caesar is Paul. And Paul, I believe he knew beyond a shadow of a doubt when he said, hey, I appeal to Caesar. I want to go to Rome. Now then, we say that because in Acts chapter 9, verse 15, Paul was told that he was going to testify to the Gentiles, and you're going to testify to the Greeks. Then in Philippians chapter 4, verse 22, Paul writes that he is going to testify before Caesar and his household. And we know that several in Caesar's household were saved, that they become believers, they became Christians. Their faith saved them. Now, I get all excited because now everything is set. The stage is set for Paul to get on the boat. Now, you just don't know, and I knew I had this timed out. I knew I was going to finish today with 15 minutes left in this class. I knew it. But, folks, there ain't no way that we're going to start this because I think I got a guy coming next week that is going to do a heck of a job with chapter 27. He is going to tell you about the Augustus band. Some will call it a cohort. Cohort is about between 400 and 600 men. The Augustus band, you're going to learn about it. Yeah. Not only you going to learn about that, hey, they set sail, and all of a sudden, it says this mighty tempest hit, and it's called Euroclydon. Ooh, folks, you're going to learn about what that is and have the damage that it does. Not only that, you're going to find out just how big, kind of like, what is it, Roy D. Mercer? Just how big a boy are you anyway? You're going to find just how big a boat this is anyway, because there's 276 people on board, plus tons and tons and tons of cargo. So how big can this ship be? I think you're going to learn about that. And then you're going to learn about the shipwreck. Oh, it is going to be, I wish I could do it, but I got somebody coming better. Okay? So you show up next week. Got any questions?